segment of my conversation with Graham Clark, we talk about something I think a lot of leaders, businesses, and even countries struggle with, which is complacency. The conversation starts with music and culture, specifically punk music and post war Europe, but quickly becomes a much bigger conversation about disruption, power, innovation, and why the future often comes from places people underestimate. Graham shares the perspective that disruption rarely comes from the people sitting comfortably at the top. It usually comes from outsiders, frustrated people, younger generations, overlooked communities, or places where people are forced to rethink the world because what currently exists is not working for them. We also talk about AI, global competition, and why certainty can become dangerous when the world is changing so quickly. This episode is really about learning to stay curious instead of complacent.
You can argue, and I've got friends who do like music history and all that stuff, and so you take the punk music movement, you can go back into the MC5s. MC5 is America's desperate need to have the origins of punk music be American, which is like, really, people, not everything in the world has to be American. But there's elements of the punk music thing going back into the mid-60s. And so in all those things, there's themes, but recognizing which of them is going to grab a hold of the public excitement and perception. And punk music was British. It was not, European as well, because the Germans, if the Britons had this dissatisfaction with the fact I grew up playing on the bomb sites, you mentioned the Second World War, so in the 60s, there were still bomb sites everywhere. Hell, if you went to Germany, the place was a bomb site. So the mental perception of nobody has that in America. Almost nobody can go visit. Nobody has a Hiroshima in southern New York. Maybe the 9/11 was an example, but it's just different, right? The Europeans, Central Europeans had it, and they even had the advantage that they didn't. One of the historians said in the 70s, the Germans' big advantage is they lost. The British were still clinging on to the idea they won. And therefore, whatever it was they had was the right answer. The Germans had no such delusion because they lost. So whatever went before was wrong. And so they got to rebuild from ground zero, right? And so it's, you got all that stuff as well, which is the same thing. So I think we live in a country in the United States which, quote, won. Economically, is still continuing to maybe win. I think we're in the place where we operate and the companies we work with. I think there's a real risk out there that I don't think we've got our heads around yet, which is the India-China thing. The fact that we have these two countries that, are arguably moving much faster in areas that are really important, like AI and alternative energy production, and than we do, and that we are very complacent because we generally are sitting on the top of the pile. And, Clay Christensen, Disruptor's Dilemma, somebody I knew pretty well 30 years ago, 25 years ago, it always comes from underneath. Punk music came from underneath. Economic disruption comes from underneath. And I think it's very dangerous to be at the tip of the pile and to have the people at the tip of the pile tell you what the future is going to look like. What you really want to do is go to the 14-year-old in the inner city and ask them, because that's where it's going to come from. Crypto is an example of that, right? It's kind of like came out of sidelines from nowhere. So I think it's going to be the case. I think it's true musically. I think it's true culturally. And I think you just have to go. You just go with the flow. There's a lot to be said for going with the flow and just trying to navigate your way through it, rather than trying to constantly predict what it is going to be and then being devastated when you're wrong, because you're going to be wrong. Just how wrong? You could be 2% wrong or 92% wrong. I don't know. And I, as I said, I've never. I think it's unfortunate. I never believe that I know the answer. I hang around a lot of really smart people who believe they know the answer, and I've never ever believed that, because I didn't have that. Again, going back to my upbringing, right? I wasn't a person in a place where I was surrounded by people who had an answer, right? If I'd been part of the wealthy society of Britain, then you believe you have the answer, right? If you're part of a successful business empire, you believe you have the answer. If you're part of a successful religious institution, you believe you have the answer. And the answer is, it's ever whatever my people do. must be the right way. And so I never had that advantage. I was always like on the outside, and I've continued, back to your original point, to keep myself on the outside, whether by deliberate planning or by pure accident, and it's been okay.
If this conversation connected with you, I think you'll connect deeply with my book, Learn to Love the Roller Coaster. The book explores what it means to navigate uncertainty in a rapidly changing world without losing yourself in fear, rigidity, or the need to always have an answer. Because one of the hardest things for people, organizations, and even societies to do is admit that the future may not look like the past that made them successful. And right now, we are living through one of the biggest shifts many of us will experience in our lifetime. You can learn more about the book and my work through Amplified Concepts in the links in the descriptions. And if you enjoyed this episode, subscribe, share it with someone thinking deeply about where the world is heading, and come back for the next segment of my conversation with Graham.